Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining me from. This is Mohammad Nabil, and I've been in this field of education for over a decade. And today I'm going to talk about why teach grammar communicatively. So I'll just look at the chat box to see whether the people can hear me clearly. Is everything clear? Very good. Okay, so everyone, I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine with me that you are on a trip to a foreign country. You're trying to order some food at a restaurant, but you can't remember the correct verb tense. Or perhaps you're trying to ask for directions to go to a place, but you're struggling with the right prepositions. So these are some of the common challenges language learners face, actually, and they can be really frustrating and discouraging. But what if there was a way to learn grammar in a way that's not only effective, but also enjoyable? That's where communicative grammar teaching comes in. So in this talk, I'll discuss the benefits of this approach, I mean teaching grammar communicatively, share effective strategies for implementing it in your classrooms, and address some of the common challenges you might encounter when teaching grammar to your learners. So let's dive in and explore how you can make grammar learning a more engaging and rewarding experience for your learners. So in my presentation, I'll have a brief comparison between exam-based teaching or learning versus communicative grammar teaching, the teacher's dilemma. But before this, in order to identify the problems, to find some solutions to it, we need to understand what grammar is and what do we mean by communicative grammar teaching. And also we will dive deeper into the problems teachers face when teaching grammar and learn about what really works for grammar teaching. We're going to offer practical solutions, effective strategies for teaching grammar, including TBL, error correction, and authentic materials. And also, let's not forget about the role of grammar practice activities in grammar teaching. And last but not least, we're going to check, or identify the impact of teaching grammar communicatively. And lastly, we will have some time for questions and answer them. Great. So let's take a look at this. So we have traditional grammar teaching versus communicative grammar teaching. And I'm going to show this comparison with these two pictures. So we have two students. They are different. The first one is called Alex, and the other one is called Emily. So I want you in the chat box to describe, these pictures. What do you think of them? How do you think they feel? So May saying anxious. Alex is confused. Amina. Yeah, actually the chat box is running crazy. Yeah. Alex is frustrated. But what about Emily? Helen, yeah, Alex looks a little bit worried. Emily is feeling cool. She's happy. She's calm. Very good. She's reading some good news, maybe. Okay, great. So here comes my first question. Who do you think has better communication skills? You don't have any reason, or any evidence for the answer here. But what do you think? Yeah, perhaps you will say Emily. So let me elaborate this a little bit more. Well, Alex and Emily are language students. So Alex actually is a diligent student who always studies hard for his English exams. He spends hours memorizing grammar rules, and completing endless exercises. However, when it comes to speaking English or communicating in the language, he struggles to express himself fluently and confidently. Why? Because his teachers use lengthy explanations, they lecture, they use boring grammar drills, meaningless translation exercises, And actually, there is no real use of grammar points in real life contexts. So learners are only prepared for the for the test, not for communication. On the other hand, well, we have Emily, who practices grammar in a meaningful context. She participates in role plays, writes stories, discusses current events in English, and even talks about everything in the society, right, in English. So she practices and uses grammar in real world situations. Her teachers teaches her grammar in context. They elicit rather than just telling the learners. They use meaningful practice activities, and they provide the learners with communicative practice opportunities. So today we're going to tell you all about Emily's story. We're going to talk about communicative grammar teaching. But before doing this, let's think of the meaning of grammar. What is grammar? Yeah, Siham says grammar learned with no pressure. Yeah, this is what Emily is doing. So what is grammar, everyone? So yeah, Siam says language rules. Taqwa says the way we build sentences. Okay, so here we're more into the form. Structure of the language. G is a set of rules. Antonia, yeah, the chat box is running. Deborah says rules of the language. Arif is saying, oh, escaped. Basic principles. Okay, well, as Scott Thornbury said, grammar is not only the study of what forms, sounds, words, sentences, or even texts are possible in a language, but also the study of the meanings these forms convey. So, grammar isn't only about the structure, it isn't only about the forms, is it about putting words together to form sentences? Is it about rules? It's also about, communicating using, the grammar that we learn in the classroom. So grammar isn't only about memorization or memorizing a bunch of rules. It's like learning the recipe of a delicious meal. Sure, you need to know the ingredients and how to mix them together, but you also need to understand how those ingredients work together to create a tasty meal. So grammar is the recipe for language. It tells us how to combine words to make sentences that make sense, right? And convey our meaning to deliver the message. That's communication. It's more about, or it's not only about the form, it's about the understanding the context and the message we want to convey. And this leads us to my next question. What is communicative grammar teaching? What comes to your mind when you hear teaching grammar communicatively? Kindly answer in the chat box. So, yes, Mahmoud says grammar is the rules of linking vocabulary. It's about the relationships. Okay. Yeah. Maha Otaibi giving examples. Kurini. Yeah, I don't know whether I pronounced it correctly or not. Yeah, it's visuals. Yeah, another good answer in the chat box. Understanding, grammar in context. Okay. Selma, authentic. Yeah, Celia, using grammar in real life situations. Yeah, excellent answers, actually. So I want you to imagine grammar, or grammar teaching, that it's like playing tennis. Okay. So yes, tennis and grammar teaching are completely different from each other, but they have lots of interesting similarities. So in tennis, you develop your skills. That's how you win, right? In grammar, we aim at doing the same thing, right? We aim to developing our skills in order to communicate using the grammar. Yes, we need to be adaptable, because players and learners must adjust to different situations. They have goal settings, So just as tennis players benefit from practicing, and of course, you know that you cannot practice alone when playing tennis, right? You need a partner to practice with. And the same thing applies to grammar. You need to communicate using the input, using grammar, right? So language learners can also improve their grammar or their language skills by practicing with classmates or language exchange partners. Okay, that's wonderful. So, yeah. So, communicative grammar teaching is about offering opportunities for communicative tasks and activities. So, actually, it's like, again, let's get back to is the example of recipe, cooking recipe. It's like learning to cook by actually cooking. So, learning by doing, yeah, that's the same thing for grammar. So you don't just learn the recipes, because many people read about recipes for cooking different dishes, but they don't ever make it. They need to practice. They need to make mistakes, learning by doing. So you practice the recipes in the kitchen, right? Taste the food and learn from your mistakes. So in the same way, communicative grammar teaching helps you learn grammar by using it in real life situations. You practice speaking, writing, and listening, and you get feedback on how you're doing. That's the teacher's job, huh? So this helps you understand grammar better and use it more naturally. So if you want to learn grammar in a way that's really fun, effective, and helps you communicate better, communicative grammar teaching is the key. And this is what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So again, opportunities for communicative tasks and activities are like teaching grammar in context. We present the grammar item and always think of, the fact that the context should be meaningful. The students should understand this context. Otherwise, the grammar item will make no sense for them, right? Yeah. And then we will move to the practice stage, control practice, to give the students some confidence before giving them the opportunity to communicate, right? And sometimes we need semi-controlled practice to scaffold, the process. And then freer practice. And here the learners should speak freely or write freely using the target language or the grammar item, right? So this can happen through using role plays, group discussions, debates, etc. We have different ways for doing this. Okay, great. So we use a context. It might be a reading or a listening text, highlight the target language, present it, do some control practice stage, they'll do some control practice exercises, semi-controlled practice, and then freer practice. That's good. But some teachers face lots of problems in doing this. So we're talking about the teacher's dilemma. And we have two examples to take a look here. So our first teacher here, says he knows that he's supposed to use the communicative approach to have the learners communicate using grammar, but he's not sure how to use this in any grammar lessons, So yes, he hears about using games, he hears about using fun activities like role plays and interviews, and all of these things are, yes, good for teaching, but teaching speaking, not grammar, right? But for grammar, it's a little bit more difficult. You need to think about that, right? So he thinks that students learn better when he gives them grammar rules first, and then they do a lot of grammar exercises. And after that, they should be ready to communicate. And when he gives the learners the opportunity to communicate, learners really face lots of issues, right? They struggle. Okay, great. That's the first problem. And don't worry, we're gonna, offer some solutions for that. The other teacher here, and she's a female, she would really like to learn how to teach grammar communicatively, because it's a nice idea having the learners communicate using the language and, overcome the fact that learners get, scared when they hear the word grammar or grammar lessons. So her students say they find her grammar explanations useful, but she can see that they often get bored and takes them forever to learn some rules. So they practice grammar a lot, but they keep making mistakes. She doesn't want to know, or she wants to know why this happens and how she can help them learn better. Of course, you all face problems like this before, right? And I myself faced such problems before in my classes. So here we're gonna add, or offer some solutions for such problems and learn about what works in grammar teaching. Yeah, it might sound a little bit difficult, but it's really interesting when you see the results in your learners, the outcomes. Okay, so what works in grammar teaching? Number one, teach grammar in context. And I want you to think with me about of the answer of this question. Which version conveys a clear meaning and involves learners? A teacher goes to the classroom and he starts talking about the simple present tense. So he says the present simple is used to talk about facts, routines, etc. Or he writes an example on the board. The boy gets up early every morning and he highlights the form of the simple present tense. So he's using here a real life example, something that happens to his learners every day. And then he clarifies the meaning by using a timeline. So what do you think? Which one is much better? Which one, conveys the meaning more easily? And, it's reducing the teacher talking time. Yeah. Yeah, of course it's number two, right? Yeah, exactly. That's right. So we have to use context for learning. We have to use real life examples because, language isn't only about the classroom environment. It's about communicating outside the classroom doors, right? Using the language in real life contexts. And this will never happen if the students don't experience this inside their classes. Okay, great. So number one, grammar in context. And you can use authentic texts. Yeah, some people prefer to use authentic texts where the language is used naturally, but be careful. Think about your learner's level because some texts are much more difficult for the students. They are too difficult for the students to grasp, to understand, right? And here you will cause much more troubles for the learners. So think about your learner's level and use real life examples. Personalize the learning experience. Okay. So you can use lots of frameworks when teaching grammar in context. You can use presentation practice production. You can use text-based presentation. You can use test, teach, test. You can use context build, etc. There are lots of frameworks to use. And all of them start with a context. The grammar presentation starts with a context, a meaningful context for learning. Okay, so the context can be a reading or a listening text. The students should do some comprehension questions because they need to understand the context, right? And then they highlight the target language and get an example. We call it the target sentence. And then we present the language using MPF or MFP, meaning form pronunciation, or meaning pronunciation form. It doesn't matter the order, but what really matters is that you start with the meaning because if the learners don't have meaning, they have nothing. Okay. And then move to the practice stage, control practice, semi-control practice, and then allow the learners to use the language freely in freer practice activities. Okay. So you can integrate grammar into skills lessons because if you remember, I said, use reading or listening texts. So here we're dealing with other skills, right? So as you can see, here's a worksheet from a lesson plan by the British Council. And the grammar lesson, it's about teaching the past continuous tense. And, it starts with a reading text and some comprehension questions. Why? Because the learners need to understand this context before learning about the grammar item. And then the lesson will end with a speaking or a writing activity. So now we're integrating language elements together, language skills and systems together, right? Yeah, so it's a reading or a listening for comprehension. We highlight the target language, MFP, MPF, and then we practice using speaking or writing at the end of the lesson. Also use context belt, and it's a beautiful framework to engage very young learners in particular. Imagine taking a look at this. You show the learners these pictures and you ask them about, working together. You ask them to work together and form a context or a story using these pictures and words. So you will ask them, for example, okay, so can you see this woman? They will say, yes. Okay, what is she doing? Maybe she's preparing to travel. Okay, great. Maybe she's traveling. Okay, great. So where is she? Where is she traveling? She's traveling to London. Do you know her name? No. Well, actually, her name is Florence. So Florence is traveling to London. Yeah. How is she going there? She's going there by train. And when is she going there? She is traveling at 10 a.m. by train. To where? To Paris. So ask the learners to work together, to use visuals and word prompts to create a context. And then you deal with meaning, form, and pronunciation and move to the controlled practice and freer practice stages. So it's a very engaging and fun way for learning grammar. And it also reduces your teacher talking time. Gone are the days where, when you had to go to the classroom and talk about the uses of grammar items and keep talking, for ages. And you think that that's the right way for the learners to understand. Stop doing this. Your learners are passive listeners. They are not learning anything. In order to learn something, you have to use it. Okay. So context belt framework is a very convenient one, especially for young and very young learners. Okay, great. So use active engagement, engage the learners with games and activities. Use an activity like find someone who and have the learners mingle, give them such worksheet or this table of this information. So find someone who likes reading, for example, riding a bike, playing sports, drawing, writing stories, and everyone stands up and moves around the classroom and find someone who has the same things, who does the same things, who likes the same hobbies. So imagine giving the learners the opportunity to feel that this classroom is our own world. It's our own environment. That's why communicative grammar teaching is great. Giving the learners such freedom and engaging activities, fun activities, and even you can use games. So you can ask the learners to work together to find out about the rules. So active engagements is like having the learners actively involved in the learning process and using grammar in a meaningful ways, such as, just like using the language in real life contexts. So instead of just memorizing rules and doing drills, students, participate actively in engaging grammar activities and games. And they will definitely, love your classes. You can use a game like Snakes and Ladders, and I used it myself when teaching some adults. Um, if conditionals, so I provided them with, this worksheet. It's a game from the British Teaching English British Council website. So you only have to add, the first clause of the conditionals in every, box and have the learners play together. They can learn in groups, use some dice, throw them, get the number, use their pebbles or pieces, and then practice. They complete the sentence with the second clause. Okay. So students take turns, throw the dice, move their pebbles, and compete, and then they complete sentences. And of course, the first one to get to the end, he's the winner. So this game is called Snakes and Ladder. Okay, so you also correct the students' errors after analyzing these errors, right? So while the learners are playing, you monitor maybe for mistakes and you write down some notes for the delayed feedback at the end of the class, right? So this stage is called the PAX or post activity correction stage. So you have to figure out whether you're focusing on fluency or accuracy. If you're aiming at accuracy, correct on the spot. And you have different techniques for doing this. And if you're aiming at fluency, just, don't interrupt the flow of their ideas and let them talk. Let them express themselves. Like, talking about wishes, talking about regrets, talking about, changing things that they did in the past. Okay, so don't interrupt the flow of their ideas. And also, instead of correcting everything, in order to achieve a more student-centered class, you can ask the learners to correct each other's mistakes. So this is called peer correction. And always, embrace the positive reinforcement. Encourage the learners to make mistakes. Also, tell them that making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process. Mistakes are always welcome if you're ready to learn the language efficiently. Okay, great. So teach grammar in context, engage them actively, use games, use activities, peer collaboration. You can also use activities like role plays and interviews. You can have the learners work in pairs and practice the grammar item in the form of, an interview or a role play or something. So the students work in pairs. They ask and answer questions using the present perfect simple, for example. So, and as an example for that, student A will ask, have you ever traveled abroad? So the answer is from student B, yes, I have. I've been to Italy and France. So the answer shouldn't only about yes or no. Okay, it should be a complete sentence that reflects the student understanding of the meaning and form, and also the correct pronunciation of the target language or the grammar input you're teaching. So focus on meaning. Allow the learners to teach grammar for writing. So you can use reading texts at the beginning, and these will be like models for writing, models for production. Ask the learners to read, okay, for comprehension questions, teach them grammar through context, and then ask them to write using the grammar items at the end of the session. This is when the learners will be able to use the language in a meaningful context. Ask them to write emails, maybe, using the simple present tense to talk about their daily routines or typical days. Yeah, okay, great. So always avoid isolation when teaching grammar. Integrate skills with grammar together in your lessons. And we already talked about that when using frameworks. You start with reading or listening text, and you end them with speaking or writing skills. Okay. So once you make the meaning clear and clarify the language using maybe visual aids, timelines, examples, the rules and everything, you have to involve the learners in the learning process and ask them concept checking questions. For example, as you can see in this sentence, he went back home at 6 p.m. yesterday. So this is to teach the past simple tense. So you cannot ask them concept checking questions by just having them look at the sentence. You have to clarify the language first. So show them a timeline and then ask them question like, did the action start in the past? Did he go back home in the past? So the answer should be, yes, he did. So now the meaning is clear for the learners that the past simple talks about an action that happened and finished in the past. So focus on meaning, use student-centered learning, elicit rather than just telling the learners, show them examples and ask them about the meaning using concept checking questions, check the meaning, ask the learners to work in pairs when doing, control practice activities, or, you can ask them to work individually and then have some kind of peer check, or, the working groups to check their answers together, etc. So you want to achieve student-centeredness in your classes when teaching grammar. And yes, you can use task-based language teaching, which prioritizes meaningful tasks, using real-world scenarios. Like creating tasks that mimic real-life situations, such as booking a flight, planning a party, or maybe writing an email. This happens in real life. Use authentic materials. Use inductive learning or grammar discovery. Some people call the text-based presentation the grammar discovery, or the guided discovery framework or approach. The learners discover the rules by themselves by looking at examples. Okay, use guided inquiry, provide hints or questions to guide the learners towards understanding the grammar. Use communicative practice activities and collaborative tasks. Use peer feedback, ask the learners to work together. This is so much beneficial for them. So now we have lots of ideas when teaching grammar communicatively. Now we presented the language. What about the practice stage? What about the role of practice activities? How many times have you heard teachers or parents say, practice makes perfect? A lot of times, right? Yeah, I believe myself that perfect practice makes perfect, not any practice. You remember Alex's scenario? Yeah, doing lots of exercises. Meaningless? No, it doesn't work, right? So only perfect practice makes perfect. So this saying can certainly be applied to many kinds of learning. However, not all practice leads to perfection. There is plenty of evidence that shows that only the right practice done at the right time improves performance and leads to success, just like the case or the scenario of Emily at the beginning. So how should your practice activities be, or practice tasks? Well, practice activities should be right in the zone of proximal development, just like Lev Vygotsky said in 1978. So Lev Vygotsky said, your practice activities shouldn't be too simple. Otherwise, they will be boring. Nor too challenging, because this will demotivate your learners, right? So it's just right in the middle, not too difficult, not too easy, just right in the middle. And this is where real learning takes place. And I'm going to show you some examples for that. And also, Larson Freeman said, your practice activity should be meaningful, engaging, and focused. So take a look at these examples. What do you think of these grammar practice activities? The first one, read the text and identify the verbs in the past simple tense. Write a paragraph about your life experiences using the present perfect simple tense. Fill in the blanks with the correct form of the verbs. What do you think of that? So for the first one, for example, read the text and identify the verbs in the past simple. Yes, well, that's an easy one, very simple actually, and you cannot repeat it a lot, because once it becomes really simple for the learners, the grammar practice will be so much boring, right? So take a look at write a paragraph about your life experiences using the present perfect simple tense. Well, this is a little bit challenging, right? This adds more challenge for that, right? Yeah, so there must be a little bit of a challenge in your grammar practice activities. And what about filling the blanks with the correct form of the verbs? Well, it requires the learners to understand the sentence and also, yeah, trying to figure out the correct form of the verb to put it, right? So again, your practice activities should be gradually from easy to then add more challenges. So not too easy, not too difficult, just like what Lev Vygotsky said, just right in the zone of proximal development where learning, or where real learning takes place. Okay, so great. So what is it in us for grammar, communicative grammar teaching? The impact on the learners and on the teachers of teaching grammar communicatively. What do you think of the impact after doing all of this? you know, so learners can use the language just like what Emily does, right? She communicates very well in different contexts, in different situations, right? Yeah, so they can remember grammar rules easily. So their grammar learning experiences will be more memorable, more beneficial, more helpful for the sake of communication, because the main aim of learning the language is for communication. That's why we use language. That's why we learn language. That's why we learn English all around the world. So the learners will be more comfortable, will improve their overall language proficiency. They will be, enjoying the learning, yeah, process. That's right. Great. So that's your turn right now, and I want to share 3 takeaways from this session, 3 things that you learned from this session. And I will look at the chat box right now. Communicate effectively. Okay, using grammar in context. Okay. Cornelia, teaching grammar in context, effective communication, Nelson Fernandez. Okay, great. Memorisate, start with context. Amal Abdul Halim, I like the idea of playing games. Salman Nasruddin, accuracy. Present the context first. Okay, good. Queen, yeah, prioritizing examples. Grammar is an active process. Very good. Don't make exercises easy or it will be boring. Neglect. Abul Fadl Nurhan Adil, using pictures and prompts to discover the rule. John, to avoid students becoming mechanical and using grammar in a meaningful communication. Very good. To make exercises easy. Have room for mistakes. Right. The idea of communicative approach. Fatima Saad songs. Grammar isn't difficult to be taught, and it can be that's interesting contribution, actually. Louis, approach should be realistic. Mahmoud, using of visuals. Nagla, teaching grammar in context. That's wonderful, guys. Wonderful contributions. Martinez, games, communication in context, practice in real. Yeah, that's right. Very good. So thank you guys for this wonderful interactive session. You interacted a lot, in the chat box, so yes, it's going crazy, actually. Sometimes I cannot see the names. So here are the resources and references I used for my presentation. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and always teach grammar communicatively because it matters. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Mohammed. That was really, really interesting to see people engaging with so many of those ideas. And I love the way at the end you gave them a chance to remember and reflect on the session. That's also a great technique for teachers, isn't it? To ask their students at the end, what's your takeaway? What did you learn today? So thank you, that's great. You can stop sharing your slides and then people can see us better. And we've got lots of questions, so let's see how many we can do in the time we've got. So Asia says, what do you think of individual learners who say they don't need to study grammar? What they need is only to learn speaking English. What would you say?
Okay, that's a common question, because I come from a non-native English speaking, country, and people only care about, developing their fluency in speaking, and they think that, okay, grammar doesn't add anything to my language. I just need to speak. And the problem here is with the learner motivation. So you have to understand why the learner is there in the classroom. We have to talk to the learner. Maybe you can have some kind of like a one-to-one tutorial session to talk to the learner individually and give him some advice on the reason why we are here in the classroom. And language consists of skills, and grammar, helps us, use these skills in order to, produce meaningful sentences, in order to help us become more understandable for other
Yeah,
people, So work on the learner motivation. That's my piece of advice here.
that's great. But can you learn grammar at the same time as practicing speaking?
Exactly, that's right. So, in speaking sessions, there is a section or a stage where you should teach the learners useful language, because you
Right.
need the learner to use this useful language when communicating. So learners can, learn speaking, how to speak, how to sound more fluent, and also learn about new grammar structures that will definitely help them communicate easily with other people.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. So there's different ways to do it, right? You could start with the grammar and then move towards communicative practice, or you could
Yeah,
get more
exactly.
communicating and then focus a bit on grammar as the
Yeah,
feedback.
either ways, yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
can work in both ways.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Nice question from Andrea. She says, "Hello, Mohammed. As you've been teaching over a decade, have you always used this communicative approach to grammar?"
Well, yes, I've always used it, but after getting lots of training, because to be honest, in my first years, I used to teach grammar traditionally, go into the classroom and talking about the rules and then giving the learners examples and yeah, okay, let's go to do some practice and that's it. Lots of practice, lots of practice. And, unfortunately, it didn't work. So I had to
Yeah.
find out myself, what might work for my learners. But, I have an interesting um, experience, because some learners sometimes need, more talking, more of our teacher talking in order to understand grammar rules. Sometimes it doesn't work with some learners. So we have to remember our priority in the classroom, which is responding to the learner's needs.
Yeah.
Yes, you
Yeah.
have to teach grammar for communication, but sometimes you need to explain more, to add more explanations, more illustrations, to use more clarification techniques. Sometimes timelines are not helping the learner, so we have to use some other examples. Sometimes we need to find something in parallel in your own language, to make things easier for
Right.
the learners. Exactly, that's right. But the problem is that if you're an Arabic language speaker, in perfect tenses, you don't have such tenses in Arabic. So this would
Yeah.
add, yeah,
Right.
a
So
little
it's
bit
a
more
challenge.
challenges. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, so
So
you've
yes,
got a
you have to
whole
use it.
toolkit, right? You can use translation, or you can say, look, this is like our language, our shared language. This isn't like our shared language. But the
Yeah.
timeline is useful for when it's you've got to explain something that doesn't exist maybe in the first language.
Yeah, that's right. That's a problem.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when doing this, you have to get really prepared for this. You have to use timelines. Maybe you have to use more examples and comparisons, comparisons
Mhm.
between, for example, we always use past simple versus present perfect simple to introduce the idea of
Yeah,
the bridge that links between the past and the present,
yeah,
so the past simple only about finished actions. So in some
yeah,
others uses, of course, yeah, we talk about the same thing in the present perfect. So yeah, it's a little bit confusing for the learners, and it
yeah.
needs, hard work from the teacher to explain it.
Yeah, definitely. But that's a really good practical tip, is to compare two tenses, put two examples next to each other, two example sentences, and check the difference. What's the difference in meaning, right, between the two
Yeah, yeah,
tenses?
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So you mentioned concept checking
Oh,
questions, which is
yeah.
another good one. Can you tell us more about them? Do you prepare them in advance of a lesson, or how do you choose good concept checking questions?
They can't be improvised. Unfortunately, they can't
Right.
be improvised. Yeah. So this is a misconception. Teachers think sometimes they can go to the classroom and, improvise some questions and ask the learners on the spot. They will never work. So concept checking questions aim at checking whether the meaning is understandable for the learners, the meaning of the target language is, achieved or not. So in order to create a concept checking question, you have to use a reference for a book, like a book for grammar for teachers, for example. Get the meaning, paraphrase it, simplify the words, and then change it into a question. And it should be a short answer question, like yes or no, maybe, or a simple phrase that reflects the student's understanding of the meaning. So there are lots of tips, not all questions should be answered with no, because, we need to, again, to get a proof of the learner's understanding of the target language.
Right.
And we shouldn't use the target language in the questions
Yeah.
because it will add more challenges for the learners. And yes, questions starting with, is it, often work well. And there are lots of tips, we can do, a totally session or a total session on creating concept checking questions, for learning. So again,
I like that.
but we need to focus on that. We don't use them for teaching the meaning. We use them for checking meaning.
Yeah. And I like your idea of we're looking for the proof, right? What's the proof that the students understand? What's the question you could ask to get them to prove
Yeah,
that? And just saying
it,
yes, nodding is not
it's a
enough.
practical way. It's a practical way.
Yeah.
Have you ever asked your learners, do you understand? That they say yes. So you
Yes.
don't understand anything.
Exactly. Okay, there's a question here from Kuyen that says, hello, which would be some good, less controlled and freer practices for grammar? So if we want to practice using grammar in communicative contexts, and he mentions role play, discussion, debates. Can you think of any other good activities that you use for practicing specific types of grammar?
Well, there are a lot of ways, you can have the learners practice grammar. So, for example, let's talk about it from the very beginning. And in the practice stage, you start with the control the practice tasks or activity to have the learners gain confidence when using the form. For example, you can use some kind of like multiple choice questions, true or false, correct the mistakes. So only one answer is accepted,
Oh, good.
right? Then we move a little bit towards, giving the learners more freedom in the less controlled or semi-controlled or less guided. Like when you ask the learners, for example, to complete the sentence, I space to Spain yesterday. So complete the sentence with a past verb. Okay, or with verb in the past simple tense. So the learners might use, for example, visited. Some learners will use traveled, maybe spent a day in, so the answers will differ, but it's a little bit controlled in a part which is the past simple tense. And then we move to giving the learners all the freedom to talk about the language or to use the language in freer practice activities like
Yeah.
speaking or writing. So we can have the learners write paragraphs or essays or anything about themselves, about their real life using the target language. And this will definitely help them to use the language correctly unconsciously. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's here,
Yeah.
it's deep inside. So
Yeah.
some learners use the language without even knowing the rules, and that's yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you memorize, what the rule is, what the structure is. What matters is that you use it in a meaningful context. You can use games just like board games, like snakes and ladders, like having
Yeah.
debates, for example, talking freely about the life experiences. Maybe if you're teaching them the simple uh, present perfect tense and so on. So yeah, there are lots and lots of
Yeah.
practice activities and games.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not always in the same class, right? Like the class on future forms, for example. It's sometimes when they come to you at the beginning of the lesson and say, I won't come next lesson. And you think, but we studied that last time. Do you correct them when it's just kind of it's genuine, authentic communication? Do you correct grammar and talk about that, or do you just focus on fluency?
Well, of course, when teaching grammar, we need to focus on both accuracy and fluency, because if we only focused on fluency, then the learners will, yes, speak very well, but with lots of mistakes, right? So we need to correct that. So everything has, a job, everything has a job to do. Like when you're aiming at accuracy, please stop them and, provide them with feedback or correct their errors or refer back to examples, or if you don't want to be or to lead it as a teacher and give them the freedom and elicit, so just give them an example and have them compare between the correct version and the wrong version, and they will correct themselves. So usually at the end of classes, we have content feedback and language feedback. In content feedback, we respond to the content they were talking about. Well, in language feedback, we deal with every single mistake in the language, and this helps a lot with accuracy. So we deal with both. In the content, we deal with fluency, and then we deal with accuracy. Yeah, that's right. And there is interesting. Yeah, I can see an interesting question here.
I think we're going to have to finish. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to cut you off because I can see so many interesting questions and so many comments. But we're going to have to finish now so that we can have a lunch break and come back. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Mohammed.
The pleasure is all mine.
Check out, everybody, Mohammed's podcast if you want to hear more. Thank you so much to Wayam on Facebook and Melissa, who is here moderating in the chat. So thank you, everybody. I'm so sorry to cut you off in full flow. We could stay here all afternoon chatting about this. People are so interested in this topic. But that's great. Thank you. We'll be back at 3 o'clock UK time. Our next session is can English teachers use STEAM activities? So that will be a good one, a nice practical session for after lunch. Take care, everybody, and see you for the later sessions. Thanks.
Happy Teachers Day. Yeah.